I never thought a pile of dirty slush would end up costing someone thousands of dollars. But here I am, watching my neighbor Patricia Whitmore sign for a certified letter through my living room window, and the look on her face is absolutely priceless. It all started 3 weeks ago on a freezing February morning in Naperville, Illinois. I was walking my golden retriever, Biscuit, around our subdivision like I do every morning before heading to my job as a software engineer. The streets were lined with those disgusting gray piles of snow mixed with road salt, dirt, and whatever chemicals the city uses to keep the streets clear. Biscuit was 7 years old, healthy as could be, and my best friend since my divorce 2 years ago. That dog got me through some of the darkest days of my life, and I would do anything for him. We were walking past Patricia's house when I saw her out front with a snow shovel, wearing her typical HOA uniform, which consisted of a puffy white coat, designer boots that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and those oversized sunglasses that screamed middle-aged entitlement. Patricia was the vice president of our HOA, and she took her duties way too seriously. I had only lived in Oakmont Meadows for 8 months, but I had already received 4 violation notices from her personally. One was for leaving my garbage cans out 2 hours past the designated time, another for having a small oil stain on my driveway, one for my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall, and the most recent one was for hanging a bird feeder that apparently violated some obscure aesthetic guideline. I tried to give her a polite nod as we approached, hoping to just walk by without incident. Biscuit was on his leash, staying on the sidewalk, minding his own business, but Patricia had other plans. "Excuse me, Peter," she called out, her voice sharp and demanding. "Your dog has been relieving himself on my lawn." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "No, he hasn't. Biscuit only goes in the designated pet areas or on our own property. I have seen him multiple times squatting on my grass," she insisted, pointing her shovel at me accusingly. "That's impossible because I always walk him the same route, and we never cut across anyone's lawn. He stays on the sidewalk." Patricia's face turned red, and she took a step toward us. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying you're mistaken," I replied, keeping my voice calm. Biscuit was sitting patiently beside me, his tail wagging slowly because he was such a friendly dog that he thought everyone wanted to pet him. "I know what I saw," Patricia hissed, "and I am going to make sure the HOA board knows that you are allowing your animal to damage private property." "Look, Patricia, I really don't want any trouble. We're just trying to take our morning walk." That's when things went completely sideways. Patricia bent down, scooped up a huge pile of that disgusting slush from beside her driveway, and before I could even process what was happening, she hurled it directly at Biscuit. The slush hit him square in the face and chest, covering his beautiful golden fur in filthy, chemical-laden ice and muck. Biscuit yelped and jumped back, shaking his head frantically and pawing at his face. My heart immediately started racing with a mixture of shock and fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, kneeling down to check on Biscuit. His eyes were red and watering, and he kept trying to rub his face against me. "That's what happens when people don't control their animals," Patricia said smugly, crossing her arms over her chest. "You just assaulted my dog. That slush has road salt and chemicals in it. It's just a little snow. Don't be so dramatic." I stood up, my hands shaking with anger. "You need to stay away from me and my dog. This isn't over." Patricia laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" "I'm on the HOA board, Peter. Good luck with that." I didn't respond. Instead, I quickly led Biscuit back toward our house, which was thankfully only 4 houses down. He was still shaking his head and whimpering, and I could see that his eyes were really irritated. Once we got inside, I immediately took him to the bathroom and started rinsing his face with lukewarm water. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was clearly in distress. The slush had gotten into his ears, his nose, and all over his chest where it had soaked through to his skin. I grabbed my phone and called the emergency vet line. The receptionist told me to bring him in immediately because road salt and the chemicals they use on roads can cause serious damage to a dog's eyes and skin. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the waiting room of Naperville Animal Emergency Clinic, filling out paperwork while Biscuit sat beside me, still looking miserable. Dr. Sarah Chen came out after about 30 minutes and called us back. She was a kind woman in her 40s who had treated Biscuit before when he had eaten something he shouldn't have. "What happened?" she asked as she examined Biscuit's eyes with a special light. I explained the entire situation, and I could see her expression darken as I described Patricia throwing the slush at him. "That's terrible," she said quietly. "Road salt can cause chemical burns, especially to the eyes and paw pads. Let me do a thorough examination." She spent the next 45 minutes checking every part of Biscuit. She flushed his eyes multiple times, examined his skin, checked his ears, and took his temperature. Finally, she turned to me with a serious expression. "Biscuit has chemical conjunctivitis in both eyes, minor chemical burns on his chest and face, and his mucous membranes are inflamed from inhaling the particulates. I need to prescribe eye drops, antibiotics, and a topical cream. He's going to be uncomfortable for at least a week, and you'll need to bring him back in 5 days for a follow-up to make sure the conjunctivitis is clearing up." "Is he going to be okay?" I asked, feeling my throat tighten. "Yes, but this could have been much worse. If the chemicals had been more concentrated, or if he had ingested more of it, we could be looking at serious internal damage. As it is, he's going to need careful monitoring and treatment." The bill came to $1,200 for the emergency visit, medications, and the scheduled follow-up. I paid it without hesitation because Biscuit's health was worth everything to me, but as I drove home with my injured dog beside me, I made a decision. Patricia Whitmore was going to pay for what she did, literally. Over the next few days, I took detailed photos of Biscuit's injuries, kept all of my receipts from the vet, and documented everything in a notebook. I had to apply eye drops 4 times a day, give him antibiotics twice a day, and put cream on his burns 3 times a day. Biscuit was such a good boy about it all, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. His eyes were still red and watery, and he didn't have his usual energy. I also started doing research. I read through every single page of the HOA bylaws and regulations. I looked up Illinois property law, liability statutes, and animal cruelty ordinances. I wanted to make sure I had all of my facts straight before I made my move. On the 3rd day after the incident, I received a letter in my mailbox from the HOA. It was a violation notice stating that I had allowed my dog to damage Patricia Whitmore's lawn, and that I was being fined $250. The letter also stated that if I failed to pay within 30 days, the fine would increase to $500, and I could face legal action from the HOA. I actually laughed when I read it. Patricia was trying to cover her tracks by creating a paper trail that made it look like I was the one in the wrong. It was such a predictable move, and it actually helped my case because it showed premeditation. I took Biscuit back to the vet on day 5 as scheduled. Dr. Chen was pleased with his progress, though she said his eyes were still slightly inflamed, and he would need to continue the drops for another week. She wrote up a detailed medical report documenting the injuries, the treatment, and the prognosis. The follow-up visit cost another $300. That night, I sat down at my computer and drafted a formal demand letter. I had never done anything like this before, but I had found templates online and consulted with a lawyer friend of mine who didn't practice this type of law, but was able to give me some general guidance. The letter was professional and to the point. It stated the facts of what happened, referenced Dr. Chen's medical reports, itemized all of the costs including the initial emergency visit, medications, follow-up visit, and even the cost of the certified mail I would be sending it with. The total came to $1,537.42. I also included a paragraph about Illinois Statute 510-70, the Humane Care for Animals Act, which prohibits animal cruelty and torture. I made it clear that throwing chemical-laden slush at a dog could be considered animal cruelty under state law. I ended the letter with a demand that Patricia pay the full amount within 14 days, or I would pursue legal action in small claims court and file a report with the police and animal control. I printed out 3 copies of the letter, included copies of all the vet bills and medical reports, and the photos of Biscuit's injuries. I put it all in a large manila envelope and took it to the post office the next morning to send it certified mail with return receipt requested. The postal worker, a friendly older man named Gene who I had chatted with before, raised his eyebrows when he saw Patricia's address. "HOA trouble?" he asked knowingly. "You could say that," I replied. "Good luck with that. I've lived in this town for 30 years, and HOAs are nothing but headaches." The return receipt came back 3 days later. Patricia had signed for the letter on a Tuesday morning at 10:15. I put the receipt in my growing file of documentation and waited. For the first week, I heard nothing. Biscuit was getting better every day. His eyes were clear, his burns had healed, and he was back to his happy, energetic self. We continued our morning walks, but I made sure to take a different route that didn't go anywhere near Patricia's house. On day 9 after sending the letter, I got a response, but not from Patricia directly. Instead, I received a letter from the HOA's attorney, a man named Marcus Wellington from a law firm in downtown Chicago. The letter was full of legal jargon, but the basic message was that Patricia denied throwing anything at my dog, claimed that I was harassing her, and that the HOA would support her fully in any legal proceedings. The letter also reiterated the demand that I pay the $250 fine for the alleged lawn damage. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my anger build with each reading. They were going to play hardball, which meant I needed to escalate. I took the afternoon off work and drove to the Naperville Police Department. I asked to speak with someone about filing a report for animal cruelty and property damage. After waiting for about 20 minutes, I was directed to a small office where Officer James Morrison was waiting. He was a tall man in his early 30s with a serious demeanor. I explained the entire situation from start to finish, showing him all of my documentation, the medical reports, the photos, and both letters. He listened carefully, taking notes. "Did anyone else witness this incident?" he asked. "Not that I'm aware of. It was early in the morning and most people were still inside." Officer Morrison nodded slowly. "That's going to make this difficult. It becomes a he said, she said situation. But I have the medical records proving that my dog was injured by chemical exposure consistent with road salt and slush. I understand, and that's good documentation. But proving that Miss Whitmore was the one who caused those injuries is another matter." "So you're saying there's nothing I can do?" "I'm not saying that. I'm going to file this report and I'll go speak with Miss Whitmore to get her statement. But I want you to understand that criminal charges in a case like this are difficult without witnesses or video evidence." I understand, I said, feeling defeated. However, Officer Morrison continued, this documentation will be very useful if you pursue this in civil court. And if she has done this to other animals in the neighborhood, having this on record could establish a pattern of behavior. That last comment stuck with me. I thanked Officer Morrison and left the police station with a copy of the incident report. As I drove home, I started thinking about what he had said about a pattern of behavior. That evening, I created a post in our neighborhood's private Facebook group. The group had about 300 members, and people used it to share information about everything from lost pets to restaurant recommendations. I kept my post brief and factual, asking if anyone else had experienced problems with members of the HOA board harassing them or their pets. I didn't mention Patricia by name, but I described the general situation. Within 2 hours, I had 43 comments and 12 private messages. I was shocked by the response. Apparently, Patricia had a reputation in the neighborhood that I had been completely unaware of. Multiple people shared stories about her aggressive behavior, particularly toward pet owners. One woman said Patricia had called animal control on her cat for being in her own yard. Another man said Patricia had threatened to sue him because his dog barked during the day when he wasn't home. Someone else mentioned that Patricia had tried to get breed-specific restrictions added to the HOA rules to ban certain types of dogs entirely. The most interesting message came from a woman named Jennifer Rodriguez who lived 2 streets over. She said that 18 months ago, Patricia had sprayed her dog with a garden hose in the middle of winter, claiming the dog had been too close to her property. Jennifer's dog had gotten pneumonia and nearly died. She said she had considered taking legal action but ultimately decided it wasn't worth the stress and conflict. I asked Jennifer if she would be willing to talk to me on the phone, and she agreed. We spoke for almost an hour that night. She described an incident that was remarkably similar to mine, except that she hadn't documented anything and hadn't pursued it legally. She expressed regret about that decision and offered to provide a written statement about her experience if it would help my case. Over the next few days, I collected statements from 5 different neighbors who had experienced problems with Patricia. None of them were as severe as what happened to Biscuit, but together, they painted a clear picture of someone with a pattern of aggressive behavior toward animals. On day 13 after sending my demand letter, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I answered hesitantly. "Is this Peter Fordham?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Peter." "This is Margaret Chen. I'm the president of the Oakmont Meadows HOA. I'm calling about the situation with Patricia Whitmore." I was surprised. I had expected Patricia or her lawyer to reach out, but not the HOA president. "Okay," I said carefully. "I want you to know that the board has been made aware of the incident, and we have reviewed your demand letter and the supporting documentation. I also understand that you've been collecting statements from other residents." "That's correct." Margaret sighed heavily. "Mr. Fordham, can I be completely honest with you, please? Patricia has been a problem for a long time. She's been on the board for 4 years, and in that time, we've received more complaints about her behavior than any other board member in the history of this HOA. The issue is that she's very litigious, and she has threatened to sue the HOA multiple times if we try to remove her from the board." "So you're just letting her harass residents?" "No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we've been trying to handle this carefully through proper procedures. But what happened to your dog crosses a line. That's animal cruelty, and the board cannot and will not defend that behavior. So, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Patricia needs to take responsibility for her actions. I've spoken with the other board members, and we're prepared to hold a special meeting to address this situation. We're also prepared to ask for her resignation from the board." "That's nice, but it doesn't pay my vet bills," I said bluntly. "I understand, and I think Patricia needs to pay those bills. I'm going to speak with her directly and make it clear that the HOA will not be providing legal support if you take her to court. I'm also going to make it clear that if she doesn't resolve this matter, we will hold a vote to remove her from the board." "Why are you telling me all of this?" "Because I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I've seen what happens when HOA boards let power-hungry people run unchecked. It's bad for everyone. Patricia needs to be held accountable, and frankly, I'm glad someone is finally standing up to her with proper documentation." We talked for a few more minutes, and Margaret promised to keep me updated on what happened. After we hung up, I felt a small glimmer of hope that this might actually be resolved without having to go to court. 2 days later, I received a phone call from Patricia herself. Her tone was completely different from our last interaction. "Peter, this is Patricia Whitmore. I think we need to talk about this situation. I'm listening. I've been advised that it would be in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter amicably." "By advised, you mean the HOA told you they wouldn't back you up?" There was a long pause. "I'm willing to pay half of your vet bills if you agree to drop this matter entirely." "Half? You injured my dog. The demand letter clearly states the full amount." "I think half is more than fair considering that there's no proof I did anything wrong." "There's plenty of proof. I have medical records, photos, witness statements, and a police report. And before you say there were no witnesses to the actual incident, I now have statements from 5 other residents about your history of aggressive behavior toward animals." "Those statements are irrelevant," Patricia said, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "Are they?" "Because I've been doing some research, and Illinois law allows for the admission of prior bad acts to show a pattern of behavior in civil cases. Even if none of those individual incidents were serious enough for legal action, together they show that you have a history of this type of conduct." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not, but I guess we'll find out in small claims court. I'm filing the paperwork tomorrow. I hope you enjoy being served at your home." "Wait," Patricia said quickly. "Let's not be hasty. What if I paid 3/4 of the bill?" "Full amount, plus the cost of the certified mail, plus the filing fees for small claims court, which are now necessary because you've refused to pay. That brings the total to $1,612.42. That's ridiculous. That's the cost of your actions. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to send me a cashier's check. If I don't receive it, I file in court the next morning. I'm not giving you an extra day to manipulate me. The original deadline in your demand letter hasn't even passed yet." She was right. Technically, I had given her 14 days and only 13 had passed. "Fine. You have until 5 p.m. on the original deadline date. That's tomorrow anyway. But after that deadline passes, the offer is off the table, and we go to court where I'll also pursue damages for emotional distress and lost wages for the time I've had to take off work to deal with this." Patricia hung up without another word. I sat there staring at my phone, my heart pounding. I had never been in a situation like this before. I had always been the type of person who avoided conflict, but something about what Patricia did to Biscuit had triggered something in me. Maybe it was because Biscuit had been there for me during the worst period of my life. Or maybe it was just that I was tired of people like Patricia thinking they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. The next day was the deadline. I took the day off work, which was easy to do since I worked remotely most of the time anyway. I sat at home, watching the clock and checking my mailbox every hour. Biscuit was curled up next to me on the couch, completely oblivious to the drama swirling around him. At 3:30 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a young man in a delivery uniform holding a large envelope. I opened the door and signed for the delivery. Inside was a cashier's check for $1,612.42 made out to me, along with a brief note that said, "This matter is now resolved. Patricia Whitmore." I actually had to sit down. I had won. Patricia had paid the full amount. I took a photo of the check and the note, then immediately deposited the check using my bank's mobile app. But the story doesn't end there. 3 days later, I received a call from Margaret Chen again. She asked if I would be willing to attend a special HOA board meeting to discuss Patricia's conduct. I agreed, curious about what would happen. The meeting was held on a Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. About 40 residents showed up, which was apparently unusual for HOA meetings. Patricia was there, sitting at the board table with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. Margaret called the meeting to order and explained that they were convening to address complaints about Patricia's conduct as a board member. She read through a summary of my complaint, including the fact that Patricia had paid the full amount of the vet bills. She then read through summaries of complaints from other residents over the past 2 years. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming that she was just enforcing HOA rules and that residents were being overly sensitive. But when Jennifer Rodriguez stood up and described how Patricia had sprayed her dog with a hose in freezing weather, and another resident described how Patricia had called the police on their teenage son for skateboarding on the sidewalk, the mood in the room turned decidedly against her. Margaret then called for a vote on whether Patricia should be removed from the board. The vote had to be conducted among all residents, not just board members, according to the HOA bylaws. Margaret had prepared ballots, and everyone in attendance was given the opportunity to vote. The vote was counted publicly, and the result was 34 in favor of removal and 6 against. Patricia's face turned bright red. She stood up abruptly, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the clubhouse without saying a word. The room erupted in conversation as soon as she left. After the meeting, several residents came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. Jennifer gave me a hug and told me she wished she had done what I did. Margaret shook my hand and apologized on behalf of the HOA for what had happened. I thought that would be the end of it, but 2 weeks later, things took another turn. I was at home on a Saturday morning when Officer Morrison called me. He asked if I had a few minutes to talk, and I said yes. "I wanted to follow up with you about the Patricia Whitmore situation," he said. After I filed the report, I went and spoke with her. She denied everything as expected, but then I started asking around the neighborhood and I found something interesting. "What's that?" I found a witness to the incident. "Your neighbor 3 houses down, an elderly man named Robert Sullivan, was looking out his window that morning and saw the whole thing. He didn't realize it was important at the time, but when I went door to door asking questions, he told me what he saw." "Are you serious?" "Completely." Mr. Sullivan gave me a detailed statement. He described seeing Miss Whitmore throw slush at your dog and saw your reaction. His account corroborates your version of events exactly. "So what does that mean?" "It means I have enough to charge Miss Whitmore with animal cruelty under Illinois statute. It's a misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year in jail and a fine of up to $2,500. I've presented the case to the state's attorney, and they've decided to move forward with charges." I was stunned. I had never expected criminal charges to actually be filed. "What happens now?" "Miss Whitmore will be served with a summons to appear in court. She'll have the opportunity to plead guilty or not guilty. If she pleads not guilty, it will go to trial." If she's convicted, it's up to the judge to determine the sentence. Will I have to testify? Probably, if it goes to trial. But many of these cases end in plea deals, especially when the evidence is strong. We talked for a few more minutes, and Officer Morrison told me he would keep me informed of any developments. After we hung up, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied that Patricia was facing real consequences for her actions. But another part of me felt uncomfortable with the idea of her potentially going to jail. I had just wanted her to pay my vet bills and leave me alone. Over the next month, the case moved through the legal system. Patricia hired a defense attorney, and there were several court appearances. I was subpoenaed to testify, along with Dr. Chen and Robert Sullivan. The trial was scheduled for early April, but 2 weeks before it was set to begin, Patricia's attorney reached out to the prosecutor with a plea deal. Patricia would plead guilty to a reduced charge of reckless conduct and would be sentenced to 1 year of probation, a $1,000 fine, 50 hours of community service, and she would be required to attend anger management classes. She would also be prohibited from holding any position in the HOA for 5 years. The prosecutor called me to ask my opinion on the plea deal. I thought about it for a long time. On one hand, I wanted Patricia to face the full consequences of what she did. On the other hand, I didn't want to spend months dealing with a trial, and the plea deal did include real accountability. I think it's fair, I finally said. As long as she actually completes the probation and community service. She will. Probation violations are taken very seriously. The plea deal was accepted, and Patricia was sentenced in late April. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing, but Margaret Chen did, and she called me afterward to fill me in. She looked miserable, Margaret said. The judge was pretty harsh with her during sentencing. He said that people in positions of authority like HOA board members have a responsibility to act with integrity, and that her behavior was completely unacceptable. Good, I said simply. The HOA board also voted to formally censure her and to ban her from attending board meetings for the duration of her prohibition from holding office. We're basically making it clear that she's not welcome in any HOA leadership capacity. I appreciate you keeping me informed. Thank you for holding her accountable. A lot of people have wanted to do what you did, but they were too afraid. Life slowly returned to normal after that. Biscuit made a full recovery and never showed any lasting effects from the incident. I continued my morning walks, though I still avoided Patricia's street out of an abundance of caution. I saw Patricia around the neighborhood occasionally. She never made eye contact with me and seemed to go out of her way to avoid any interaction. I was fine with that arrangement. About 6 months after the incident, I was at the grocery store when I ran into Jennifer Rodriguez. We chatted for a few minutes, and she told me that she had heard Patricia was planning to sell her house and move to a different subdivision. Really? I asked. Yeah, apparently she can't stand living here anymore after everything that happened. Good riddance, if you ask me. I never wanted to drive her out of the neighborhood. I just wanted her to take responsibility. I know, and that's what makes you a good person. But sometimes people like Patricia need to face real consequences before they'll change their behavior, and even then, sometimes they don't change. They just move somewhere else and become someone else's problem. I thought about that conversation a lot over the following weeks. Jennifer was probably right. Patricia likely hadn't learned anything from this experience, except that she had finally encountered someone who wouldn't back down. The for sale sign went up in Patricia's yard in September, about 7 months after the incident. The house sold quickly, and by early November she was gone. A nice young couple with twin toddlers moved in, and I made sure to welcome them to the neighborhood properly. The HOA elected a new vice president, a retired teacher named Harold Barnes who was known for being fair and level-headed. The entire tone of the HOA changed after Patricia left. Violation notices decreased dramatically, and the board started focusing on actual community improvements instead of petty enforcement actions. I ran into Margaret Chen at a neighborhood holiday party in December, almost a year after the incident. We talked about how much the HOA had improved, and she thanked me again for what I had done. "You know, that whole situation taught me something important," Margaret said. "Sometimes we let bad behavior continue because confronting it seems too difficult or too risky. But the cost of not confronting it is usually much higher in the long run. I just didn't want my dog to be hurt and have to pay for someone else's cruelty," I said. "It was more than that, though. You stood up for yourself and for other people who couldn't or wouldn't stand up for themselves. That takes courage." I appreciated her words, but I still didn't see myself as particularly courageous. I had just been angry and wanted justice for Biscuit. As the anniversary of the incident approached, I reflected on everything that had happened. A single moment of cruelty had spiraled into months of conflict, legal proceedings, and community drama. But it had also resulted in meaningful change. Patricia was gone, the HOA was better, and other residents felt more empowered to speak up when something wasn't right. Biscuit was now 8 years old and still my faithful companion. Every morning when we went for our walks, I was reminded of that awful February day when Patricia threw slush at him. But I was also reminded that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable, is always worth it. The certified mail receipt that Patricia had signed was still in my file cabinet, along with all of the other documentation from the case. Every now and then, I would pull out the file and look through it, marveling at how a simple demand letter had set off such a chain of events. People often ask me if I would do it all again, knowing how much time and stress it would involve. My answer is always the same: absolutely. Because some things are worth fighting for, and Biscuit was definitely one of those things. The story of Patricia Whitmore and the slush incident became something of a legend in Oakmont Meadows. New residents would hear about it and ask me questions. I always kept my answers brief and factual, not wanting to dwell on the drama. But I did notice that people were more careful about how they treated their neighbors and their neighbors' pets. Nobody wanted to be the next Patricia Whitmore. The HOA also made some positive changes in the wake of the incident. They revised their rules to include specific language about respectful conduct and created a formal complaint process for residents who felt they were being harassed by board members. They also implemented term limits for board positions to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. I eventually joined the HOA board myself, not because I particularly wanted to, but because Margaret convinced me that the HOA needed people who understood the importance of fair and reasonable governance. I served for 2 years as the secretary, helping to document meetings and ensure that decisions were made transparently. During my time on the board, I saw firsthand how easy it is for HOAs to become dysfunctional when the wrong people are in charge. I also saw how much good an HOA can do when it's run by people who genuinely care about the community. We organized neighborhood events, negotiated better rates for common area maintenance, and created a fund to help residents who were struggling financially to keep up with their obligations. Biscuit became something of a celebrity in the neighborhood. Kids would ask to pet him, and people would stop me on walks to ask how he was doing. He soaked up all the attention, his tail wagging nonstop whenever we were out and about. I also developed real friendships with several of the people who had supported me during the conflict with Patricia. Jennifer Rodriguez and I became close friends, often getting together for dinner or meeting up for walks with our dogs. Robert Sullivan, the elderly man who had witnessed the incident and provided the crucial testimony, became like a grandfather figure to me. I would stop by his house regularly to check on him and help with things like yard work and home repairs. One afternoon, about 18 months after the incident, I was sitting on my back deck with Biscuit when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Peter Fordham?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Amanda Richardson, and I'm dealing with a situation similar to what you went through with your HOA. I found your story on a forum about HOA disputes, and I was hoping I could ask you some questions about how you handled it." I ended up talking with Amanda for over an hour, walking her through the steps I had taken and the documentation I had collected. Her situation involved a board member who had damaged her fence in retaliation for her filing a complaint about unauthorized rule changes. I shared everything I had learned about demand letters, small claims court, and dealing with difficult HOA board members. "Thank you so much," Amanda said at the end of our conversation. "I was feeling really overwhelmed and powerless, but talking to you has given me hope that I can actually do something about this." "Just document everything and stay calm," I advised. "Don't let anger make you do or say something you'll regret. Let the facts speak for themselves." That conversation made me realize that my experience with Patricia had value beyond just my own situation. Over the next several months, I received a few more calls and emails from people dealing with similar HOA problems. I started writing down my advice and best practices, thinking that maybe I could help others navigate these kinds of conflicts. I eventually created a simple website with a guide for dealing with HOA disputes. I included templates for demand letters, tips for documentation, and information about relevant laws in Illinois and other states. The website was basic, but it seemed to help people. I got thank you emails from strangers who said my advice had made a difference in their situations. My own life continued to move forward in positive ways. I got a promotion at work that came with a significant raise. I started dating someone I met through Jennifer, a teacher named Rachel who loved dogs almost as much as I did. Biscuit approved of her immediately, which I took as a good sign. The neighborhood continued to thrive under the new HOA leadership. Property values increased, and Oakmont Meadows developed a reputation as one of the better-managed subdivisions in Naperville. People wanted to live there because they knew the HOA was fair and reasonable. I sometimes wondered what happened to Patricia after she moved away. Part of me hoped that she had learned from the experience and changed her behavior. But realistically, I suspected that Jennifer had been right, and Patricia had just become someone else's problem. On the 2-year anniversary of the incident, I took Biscuit for an extra long walk through the neighborhood. It was another cold February morning, but this time there was no confrontation, no drama, just a peaceful walk with my best friend. As we walked past the house where Patricia used to live, I saw the new family outside building a snowman with their kids. They waved at me, and I waved back. That simple moment of neighborly friendliness represented everything that had changed. The culture of fear and pettiness that Patricia had created was gone, replaced by a sense of community and mutual respect. Biscuit and I walked back home, and as we settled into our morning routine, I realized that the whole experience had taught me something important about standing up for yourself and others. It's not always easy, and it's not always comfortable, but it's necessary. Because when good people stay silent in the face of bullying and abuse, the bullies win. I never regretted sending Patricia that certified mail demand letter. It had set off a chain of events that transformed not just my own situation, but the entire neighborhood. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to document the facts, follow through with consequences, and refuse to back down in the face of intimidation. The file cabinet in my home office still contained all of the documentation from the case, but I rarely looked at it anymore. I didn't need to relive those events to remember the lessons they taught me. I carried those lessons with me every day in how I interacted with people, how I approached problems, and how I thought about justice and accountability. Biscuit was getting older now, and I knew that our time together was finite, but I was grateful for every single day I had with him. He had been there for me during my divorce when I felt completely alone, and in a strange way, the incident with Patricia had brought us even closer together. I had fought for him because he couldn't fight for himself, and that bond of protection and loyalty was unbreakable. Looking back on everything that happened, from that awful moment when Patricia threw Slush at Biscuit to watching her sign for the certified letter that started her downfall, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because I had hurt anyone or gotten revenge, but because I had stood up for what was right and had seen it through to the end. The cost of standing up had been significant in terms of time, stress, and emotional energy. But the cost of not standing up would have been much higher. Patricia would have continued to torment residents and their pets. The HOA would have remained dysfunctional and toxic, and I would have had to live with the knowledge that I had let someone hurt my dog without any consequences. Instead, I could walk through my neighborhood with my head held high, knowing that I had made it a better place. The vet bills had been paid, justice had been served, and most importantly, Biscuit was healthy and happy. On a warm spring evening about 2.5 years after the incident, the HOA organized a neighborhood barbecue at the community park. I brought Biscuit along, and he enjoyed getting attention from all the kids and adults. Margaret Chen gave a short speech thanking everyone for making Oakmont Meadows such a wonderful place to live, and she made a point of mentioning how far the community had come in the past few years. As the sun set and people started packing up to head home, I sat on a bench with Biscuit at my feet and Rachel beside me. I looked around at all the happy families, the friendly conversations, and the sense of community that filled the air. "What are you thinking about?" Rachel asked. "Just how different things are now compared to a couple of years ago," I said, "because of what you did. Because of what a lot of people did. I just happened to be the one who started it." Rachel squeezed my hand. "You did more than start it. You followed through, even when it was hard." "That's rare." I smiled and reached down to scratch Biscuit behind his ears. He looked up at me with those soulful brown eyes, his tail thumping against the ground. In that moment, I knew that every bit of stress, every difficult conversation, and every hour spent dealing with lawyers and courts had been worth it. Because at the end of the day, home isn't just about the house you live in or the property you own. It's about the community you build, the relationships you nurture, and the willingness to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. Patricia Whitmore had forgotten that lesson if she ever knew it at all, but the rest of us in Oakmont Meadows had learned it well. As we walked home that evening, Biscuit trotting happily ahead of us, I thought about the certified mail receipt one more time. Such a simple thing, really. Just proof that someone had received a letter. But that receipt had represented so much more than that. It had been proof that actions have consequences, that documentation matters, and that ordinary people can stand up to bullies and win. The story could have ended so many different ways. I could have just absorbed the vet costs and moved on, letting Patricia get away with what she did. The HOA could have circled the wagons and protected her. The criminal justice system could have declined to pursue charges, but none of those things happened. Instead, every system worked the way it was supposed to work, and justice was served. I never wanted to be the kind of person who got involved in neighborhood drama or legal disputes. But life doesn't always give you the choices you want. Sometimes, you have to choose between standing up and staying silent, between fighting for what's right and taking the path of least resistance. I chose to stand up, and I would make that same choice again in a heartbeat. Because Biscuit deserved someone who would fight for him. Because the other residents of Oakmont Meadows deserved to live without fear of harassment. And because sometimes, the only way to stop a bully is to face them head-on with facts, documentation, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The certified mail that Patricia signed for had been the first step in that process, but it was far from the last. It had taken months of persistence, countless hours of documentation, and the courage to see it through even when the outcome was uncertain. But in the end, it had all been worth it. As I settled into bed that night with Biscuit curled up at my feet and Rachel sleeping peacefully beside me, I felt genuinely content. The nightmare that had started on that cold February morning had transformed into something positive. The neighborhood was better, I had grown as a person, and most importantly, the dog who had saved me during my darkest days was safe, healthy, and loved. That's what justice looks like, I thought as I drifted off to sleep. Not some grand, dramatic moment, but rather the quiet satisfaction of knowing you did the right thing and saw it through to the end. The certified mail receipt was just a piece of paper, but what it represented was so much more. It represented accountability, consequences, and the simple truth that no one, not even a HOA board member, is above the law. And that was a lesson worth fighting for.